It began like any other day. I was sitting on the porch, enjoying the late afternoon sun, sipping a beer, and taking in the familiar sounds of our quiet suburban neighborhood. My wife, Sarah, was next door helping our neighbor, Jason, with his garden. I didn't think much of it. Sarah had always been helpful and friendly, the kind of person who lent a hand without being asked. But something about the way she laughed, soft, almost shy, caught my attention. Jason, a widower in his early 40s, had moved in a year ago. He was charming in a way that set people at ease, with a knack for conversation that made him popular at neighborhood barbecues. I liked him well enough. He was the guy who'd borrow your tools and always return them cleaner than before, who'd crack a joke and make you laugh at the end of a long day. But over the last few months, I'd noticed Sarah spending more and more time with him. Helping him settle in, she'd say. He's been through a lot. That day, though, as I watched her through the hedges, her body language seemed different. The way she leaned toward him, how she brushed her hair back while laughing, it didn't sit right with me. I told myself I was overthinking it. Sarah was my wife, my partner of 8 years, and we'd always been solid. But still, something nagged at me, a flicker of doubt I couldn't shake. That night, lying in bed, I asked her casually, "So, what were you and Jason talking about today?" She didn't look up from her phone. "Just his garden. He's clueless about plants, you know." Her answer was quick, too quick, but I didn't press her. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband who saw betrayal where there wasn't any. Still, as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was changing. Something was slipping through my fingers, and I didn't know how to stop it. The days that followed were uneventful, at least on the surface. Sarah carried on as usual, tending to the house, working her part-time job at the local library, and chatting with Jason whenever the opportunity arose. I convinced myself I was imagining things. After all, she'd always been kind-hearted, and Jason was just a neighbor. But that whisper of suspicion lingered, like a splinter in my mind. One evening, a week after the garden incident, Sarah came home later than usual. She had been at a book club meeting, or so she said. She breezed in with a casual smile, her cheeks flushed, and the faint scent of cologne clinging to her sweater. It wasn't her perfume, and it wasn't mine. "How was book club?" I asked, keeping my tone light as I set the table for dinner. "Great," she said, a little too brightly. "We're reading some historical drama now, lots of intrigue and betrayal." She laughed as she set her purse down, her laugh ringing hollow in my ears. I nodded, pretending to listen, but my thoughts were racing. Later that night, when she was asleep, I did something I never thought I'd do. I checked her phone. My hands trembled as I unlocked it. She had shared the passcode with me years ago, back when trust was implicit. Her messages were mostly mundane. Chats with her friends, her mom, and work-related emails. But then I saw a thread with Jason. Most of it was innocent, about the neighborhood association meeting and tips for his garden. Still, something about their tone felt off. Then I saw it. A single, seemingly harmless line from her. "I'll be there at 7 and don't worry, he doesn't suspect a thing." My stomach churned. Doesn't suspect what? I whispered to myself. I stared at the screen, my mind grasping for answers that wouldn't come. I put her phone back, careful to leave no trace of my snooping. I wanted to confront her, but I needed more. If I accused her now, she could brush it off as a misunderstanding, gaslight me into thinking I was paranoid. No, I needed to be certain. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as Sarah slept soundly beside me. The woman I loved, the woman I trusted, now felt like a stranger. And Jason? The neighbor I'd shared beers with, laughed with. Was he my friend? Or something else entirely? Whatever was happening, I vowed to find out. And if my suspicions were right, they wouldn't see me coming. The morning after my discovery, I felt like a man on a mission, though I had no clear plan. The words in that message, "He doesn't suspect a thing," burned in my mind. What didn't I suspect? Was I reading too much into a single line? Or had I stumbled onto something more sinister? Sarah acted as though everything was fine. She hummed while making breakfast, kissed me goodbye as I left for work, and even reminded me to pick up groceries on my way home. But all I could see now were cracks in her facade. Every smile felt calculated, every word rehearsed. I needed answers, But more importantly, I needed proof. That evening, I decided to test the waters. While we ate dinner, I casually mentioned, Jason asked if I could help him with some home repairs next weekend. Sarah froze for just a fraction of a second, her fork pausing mid-air before she quickly recovered. Oh, that's nice of you. What does he need help with? I shrugged, watching her closely. Something about his fence needing repairs. Figured I'd lend a hand. Her response was measured, too measured. That's sweet of you. He's lucky to have a neighbor like you. Her words were harmless, but her tone wasn't. It wasn't the warm, easygoing Sarah I knew. She sounded nervous, like she was trying to steer the conversation back into safe territory. It was subtle, but I caught it. She had something to hide. Later that night, when Sarah said she was going to take a bath, I seized the moment. I went to our laptop, which we shared, and opened her email. She rarely logged out, so it was easy to gain access. At first, everything seemed ordinary. A few forwarded newsletters, some correspondence with her friends. But then I noticed a folder labeled miscellaneous. Something about it seemed odd. It wasn't her usual style to keep things unorganized. Inside were a handful of emails with no subject lines. They were all from a private email account I didn't recognize, one that didn't match any of her usual contacts. I opened the latest one. My stomach tightened as I read. Tomorrow works for me. I'll leave the back door unlocked. Same time? It was signed with a single initial, J. I couldn't breathe. My hands shook as I scrolled further, scanning for more context. But the emails were brief, cryptic. Whoever J was, they were careful not to leave too much behind. But I didn't need context to understand what was happening. Jason. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dim light of the living room, staring at the screen. The neighbor I'd trusted, who I joked with over beers, was sneaking around with my wife. And they thought I didn't suspect a thing. But they were wrong. I suspected plenty. And now, it was time to take the next step. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind buzzing with plans. Sarah was still asleep, her face serene, almost innocent. For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then the memory of her messages with Jason surged back, and the guilt twisted into anger. This wasn't the woman I thought I'd married. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. She would deny everything, twist the narrative, and I couldn't risk giving her time to cover her tracks. Instead, I needed to collect more evidence. As Sarah headed off to her library shift, I decided to visit Jason. I needed to look him in the eye, to see if he'd flinch. Maybe I could catch him off guard and confirm my suspicions. Jason answered the door quickly, his usual warm smile in place. Hey man, what's up? I forced a smile. Not much. Thought I'd drop by and see if you really needed help with your fence. He blinked, surprised. The fence? Oh no, it's holding up fine for now. Thanks for asking, though. He was lying. I knew it. His casual shrug, the slight hesitation. It was all too convenient. Gotcha, I said, leaning casually against the doorframe. Sarah mentioned she was helping you with your garden last week. How's that coming along? Jason scratched the back of his head, his smile tightening just a fraction. Oh yeah, she's been a huge help. Got a green thumb, that one. You're lucky to have her. His words felt like a jab, like he was mocking me, but I kept my tone light. Yeah, she's great. Anyway, I'll let you get back to whatever you were doing. I turned to leave, but not before catching a flicker of relief cross his face. As I walked back to my house, my suspicions solidified. They were hiding something, and I was done playing games. That afternoon, while Sarah was at work, I decided to take my investigation to the next level. I bought a small voice-activated recorder from a local electronics store. It was discreet, easy to hide, and perfect for what I had in mind. When I got home, I placed the device in Jason's backyard, near the area where he and Sarah often worked on his garden. I'd noticed they always met in the same spot, conveniently tucked away from view. If they were up to something, I'd hear it. Later that evening, as Sarah cooked dinner, I brought up Jason again. Ran into Jason today, I said casually, sipping my drink. He says you've been a big help with his garden. Sarah barely glanced up from the stove. Oh yeah, just trying to get him set up with some perennials. He's hopeless with plants. Her tone was light, dismissive, but I caught the faintest flush in her cheeks. She was lying. "That's nice of you," I said, masking my bitterness. "You should invite him over for dinner sometime." Her hands faltered for a brief second as she chopped vegetables. "Sure," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "That could be fun." We both knew it wasn't going to happen. The following day, while Sarah was at Jason's house again under the guise of helping with his garden, I retrieved the recorder. My heart pounded as I played back the audio. At first, all I heard was the hum of distant traffic and the rustle of leaves. But then, their voices came through, clear and unmistakable. Jason's tone was low, playful. "He doesn't suspect a thing, does he?" Sarah's soft laugh followed. "Of course not. He trusts me. Why would he?" The casual way they spoke, as if I were some oblivious fool, ignited a fury in me I hadn't known I possessed. Jason chuckled. "Good. We've got to be careful. Can't risk him finding out." Their voices trailed off, replaced by muffled sounds that made my stomach churn. I stopped the recording, my hands trembling. There was no denying it now. They were having an affair, and they thought I was too blind to notice. But they had underestimated me. They thought they were clever, but I was smarter. I wasn't just going to expose them. I was going to make them regret every choice that brought them to this point. The weight of the betrayal sat heavy on my chest, but beneath it burned a cold determination. I wasn't going to let Sarah and Jason walk all over me. If they thought I'd crumble, they were wrong. I didn't just want answers. I wanted justice. And I knew the only way to get it was to keep playing the unsuspecting husband a little while longer. That evening, I acted as though everything was normal. I smiled at Sarah, laughed at her jokes, and even kissed her on the cheek before bed. She didn't suspect a thing, which both infuriated and empowered me. Her comfort was my weapon now. The next morning, while Sarah was at work, I called in sick. I didn't plan on wasting the day. First, I retrieved the recorder and tucked it away somewhere safe. I'd need it later. Then, I drove to a private investigator's office. I'd never imagined I'd need to hire someone like this, but desperate times called for desperate measures. The investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Clara, listened intently as I explained my suspicions. "Do you have proof already?" she asked. I nodded. "Some recordings and a few emails. But I need more, something definitive." Clara leaned back in her chair, studying me. "Are you looking for evidence for legal reasons? Or something else?" "Both," I admitted. "I need to know everything. Where they go, what they do, and if there's anything else they're hiding. And I want to make sure that when this blows up, it's on my terms." She nodded, jotting notes. "We'll get started right away. Do you have access to her schedule? Or know when they usually meet?" I handed over what I had. Sarah's work hours, her usual routines, and even the emails I'd found. Clara promised to keep me updated, and I left feeling like I'd taken the first real step toward reclaiming control. That evening, I decided to bait Sarah. Over dinner, I brought up an upcoming work trip I'd invented, 3 days in the city for a training seminar. "I leave next Wednesday," I said casually, buttering my bread. "It's going to be boring, but at least the hotel has a nice bar." Sarah perked up at the news, but she hid it poorly. Her eyes brightened for just a second before she masked it with feigned disappointment. "Oh, that's too bad. I'll miss you." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll miss you too." Her reaction was all the confirmation I needed. She was already calculating how to use my absence. The next few days were a blur of quiet preparation. Clara kept me updated with snippets of Sarah's activities, routine stops at Jason's house, late-night text exchanges, and even a few questionable phone calls. Meanwhile, I installed a few small cameras around the house, focusing on the living room and kitchen. If she and Jason thought my absence was an invitation, I'd make sure their betrayal was caught in high definition. When Wednesday rolled around, I packed a bag and kissed Sarah goodbye. "Be good while I'm gone," I said with a smirk. She laughed lightly. "Always." I drove off, but instead of heading to the city, I checked into a small motel on the other side of town. It wasn't glamorous, but it was close enough to keep an eye on things. From my laptop, I monitored the live feeds from the cameras. Hours passed without much activity. Sarah came home from work, made dinner, and watched TV. For a moment, I thought I might have been wrong about her taking advantage of my trip. Then, just after 9 p.m., she changed into something much too flattering for a quiet night at home. I watched as she glanced at her reflection in the hallway mirror, adjusted her hair, and sent a quick text. Minutes later, Jason walked through the door. My hands clenched into fists as I watched them embrace in the kitchen. It wasn't friendly, it was intimate. Too intimate. They laughed, poured wine, and settled on the couch as if they didn't have a care in the world. My stomach churned, but I forced myself to keep watching. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment they revealed exactly who they were. I sat in the motel room, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating my face as I watched Sarah and Jason laugh on the couch. Their comfort with each other sickened me. They shared inside jokes, glances that lingered, and the kind of casual touch reserved for lovers, not neighbors. It was surreal, like watching someone else's life fall apart, except it was my own. Jason poured more wine, his arm draped lazily over Sarah's shoulders. She leaned into him, laughing at something he said. My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. I couldn't afford to lose control. Not yet. Then they kissed. It wasn't a tentative, hesitant kiss. It was passionate, full of heat and familiarity. My hands balled into fists as I watched, rage boiling under my skin. I wanted to storm into the house, to drag Jason out by the collar and demand answers from Sarah. But I couldn't. Not yet. I needed this moment, this damning evidence. The next morning, I met with Clara, the private investigator. She listened as I recounted the events of the previous night, showing her the video footage I had captured. "This is more than enough to confirm the affair," she said, her tone professional but sympathetic. "What do you want to do with this?" "I want to destroy them," I said, my voice steady. "But I want to do it on my terms." Clara nodded. "We can compile everything into a detailed report. Photos, timelines, corroborating evidence. This way, there's no room for denial." She paused, studying me. "Do you want me to confront them?" I shook my head. "No. I need to be the one who does it. I need them to see my face when it all comes crashing down." I spent the next 2 days meticulously planning my move. I made sure the footage was backed up in multiple locations. I prepared emails to send to key people in Sarah and Jason's lives, friends, family, coworkers, people who deserve to know the truth. And then, I waited for the right moment. When Saturday came, I returned home earlier than planned. Sarah hadn't expected me until Sunday night, and I wanted to catch her off guard. As I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Jason's car parked down the street. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, the faint sound of music drifting from the living room. There they were. Sarah and Jason sat close on the couch, their legs intertwined, laughing softly. They didn't even notice me at first. I stood in the doorway, watching them for a long moment, letting the weight of my presence sink in. When Sarah finally glanced up and saw me, her face went pale. She scrambled to untangle herself from Jason, who froze like a deer in headlights. "Hi," I said, my voice calm but ice cold. "Don't let me interrupt." What are you doing here?" Sarah stammered, her eyes wide with panic. "I could ask you the same thing," I said, stepping further into the room. My gaze shifted to Jason. "Funny, I don't remember inviting you over." Jason opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His confidence had evaporated. "Save it," I snapped, holding up my phone. "I've seen everything. The texts, the emails, the video from Wednesday night." I let my words hang in the air, savoring the way their faces twisted in shock and horror. "Video?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "Yes, Sarah. Video. Of the two of you, here, while I was out of town." My voice dripped with disdain as I threw the truth at them like daggers. "You two thought you were so clever, so careful. But you underestimated me." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. "I can explain," she began. "No," I cut her off sharply. "You can't. There's nothing you can say that'll fix this." Jason shifted uncomfortably, looking as though he wanted to bolt for the door. "Maybe I should go," he muttered. I stepped closer to him, my voice low and dangerous. "You're not going anywhere. You're going to sit there and listen to what I have to say." The room was deathly quiet as Jason and Sarah sat frozen, their faces pale. I stood over them, my calm veneer masking the storm raging inside me. For months, they had mocked me with their lies, their stolen glances, their secret meetings. Now, they couldn't hide. Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I began, my voice low but razor-sharp. I trusted you, Sarah. And you, Jason. I welcomed you into my home, treated you like a friend. And this is how you repay me? Jason opened his mouth to speak, but I silenced him with a glare. Don't, I snapped. You don't get to talk. You don't get to excuse this. Sarah's eyes brimmed with tears. It wasn't supposed to happen like this, she whispered, her voice cracking. I laughed, a bitter sound that filled the room. Oh, really? How was it supposed to happen, Sarah? Were you going to wait until I was completely blindsided? Or were you planning to string me along while you played house with him behind my back? It wasn't planned, she said desperately. Don't. I cut her off, slamming my hand on the coffee table. You don't get to twist this into some mistake. This wasn't an accident. You made choices, deliberate, calculated choices, and now you're going to live with the consequences. Jason shifted in his seat, trying to muster some semblance of courage. Look, man, I rounded on him, my anger searing. You what, Jason? Thought you could screw my wife and I'd never find out? Thought you were smarter than me? Do you have any idea how pathetic you look right now? Jason shrank under my glare, his bravado crumbling. I turned back to Sarah, my tone icy. And you? How long has this been going on? Sarah hesitated, her eyes darting toward Jason. I could see her mind racing, trying to decide whether to lie or come clean. 6 months, she admitted finally, her voice barely audible. 6 months, I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. Half a year of lying to my face, sneaking around, and pretending everything was fine. You've been tearing apart our marriage for 6 months while I trusted you. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing now, but I felt nothing but cold fury. I stepped back, pulling out my phone. Since you two seem to love keeping secrets, let me show you something. I opened the video from Wednesday night, the one showing Sarah and Jason kissing on my couch, and played it for them. The audio was loud and clear, their laughter echoing in the room as they watched themselves on screen. Sarah gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Jason looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole. This is who you are, I said, my voice steady. This is what you've done. Sarah tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. I'll do anything, she pleaded. Please, let me fix this. Fix this? I scoffed. You can't fix this, Sarah. You killed any chance of fixing it the moment you decided I didn't matter. I turned to Jason. And you? You're going to wish you'd never moved into this neighborhood. What are you going to do? He asked, his voice shaky. I smiled grimly. You'll find out soon enough. Without another word, I left the room, ignoring Sarah's cries and Jason's stammered apologies. I went straight to my office and sent the emails I had prepared, footage, timelines, and messages sent to key people in their lives. Sarah's parents, Jason's coworkers, and even the neighborhood association received a full account of their betrayal. When I returned to the living room, Sarah and Jason were still there, their faces filled with dread. Check your phones, I said, my voice cold. You're both about to find out what it feels like to have your lives fall apart. Their phones buzzed almost simultaneously, and as they read the messages, the color drained from their faces. This isn't fair, Jason stammered, looking up at me. You didn't have to do this. I leaned in close, my voice deadly. Fair? You think this is unfair? You don't even know the meaning of the word. But don't worry, I'll teach you. Jason bolted out of the house like a man on fire, clutching his phone as if it were a lifeline. I watched him through the window, pacing the sidewalk, his panicked voice carrying faintly into the night as he called someone. Likely damage control for the storm I had unleashed. Good luck with that, I thought bitterly. Sarah, meanwhile, sat on the couch, her face buried in her hands. She had stopped crying, but her shoulders trembled with the weight of everything crashing down around her. You destroyed everything, she whispered, her voice hoarse. My parents, my friends. They'll never look at me the same again. Good, I said, my tone devoid of sympathy. You don't get to pretend this isn't your fault. You made your choices, Sarah. Now you live with the consequences. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. But why did you have to humiliate me like this? You could have just talked to me. We could have handled this privately. Privately? I laughed coldly. You mean like how you privately betrayed me with Jason? How you privately lied to my face every single day for 6 months? No, Sarah. This doesn't get swept under the rug. Not this time. Her voice broke as she tried to defend herself. I didn't mean to hurt you. You didn't mean to hurt me? I snapped, my voice rising. Every time you went to him, every time you laughed at me behind my back, every time you thought I wouldn't notice, that was a choice. You knew exactly what you were doing, Sarah, and you didn't care. An hour later, Jason's car sped off down the street, his tires screeching in his haste to escape. I didn't care where he went. For all I knew, his wife, Rachel, was already on her way to serve him divorce papers. I had sent her everything, texts, emails, and the video footage. She deserved to know the truth about the man she was married to. Sarah sat in silence as I gathered a few of her belongings into a bag. Her eyes followed my every move, but she didn't protest. I didn't need to tell her what I was doing. She already knew. Where am I supposed to go? She asked quietly as I handed her the bag. I don't care, I said bluntly. Go to your parents. Go to a friend's house. Hell, go to Jason if you're feeling bold. Just don't stay here. You don't live here anymore. Her face crumpled at my words, but she didn't argue. She stood slowly, gripping the bag like it was a lifeline. Is this really it? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. 8 years, just gone? 8 years ended the moment you decided I wasn't enough, I said coldly. This is just the aftermath. Once she was gone, the house felt eerily quiet. I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the empty couch where they had sat, and felt an overwhelming mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, relief. But beneath it all was a quiet satisfaction. They thought they had outsmarted me, but I had taken control of the narrative. This was my story now, not theirs. I poured myself a drink and sat in the chair by the window, watching the streetlights flicker. My phone buzzed with messages from neighbors and friends, all reacting to the evidence I had shared. There was no turning back now, but I didn't want to. Let the world see who they really were. One message stood out, a reply from Rachel, Jason's wife. Thank you for sending this. I had no idea. If there's anything I can do, let me know. Her words struck a chord in me. She sounded as blindsided as I had been, a victim of Jason's lies just as I had been of Sarah's. For a moment, I considered replying, but I decided against it. This wasn't the time. I had more work to do before I could even think about rebuilding anything. I didn't sleep that night, but I didn't feel tired. Adrenaline coursed through me as I pieced together the final steps of my plan. Jason thought he could run, but there was nowhere to hide from the fallout. I had made sure of that. The next morning, I reached out to the local real estate association, where Jason worked as an agent. I sent them the same damning evidence I had shared with Sarah's parents and friends. Not only did it expose his personal misconduct, but it also revealed that he had misused client funds, something Sarah had unknowingly confessed to me during one of our arguments months ago. By mid-afternoon, Jason's face was plastered across the association's website, accompanied by a notice that he was under investigation for ethical violations. Calls from his clients were redirected to his colleagues, and his reputation, once spotless, was now in tatters. I followed up with Rachel, Jason's wife, later that day. She thanked me again for the evidence and revealed that she had already filed for divorce. He's staying at a cheap motel on the outskirts of town, she said. I don't even think he knows where to go from here. Good, I thought. Let him feel the isolation, the shame. He had taken everything for granted, and now, piece by piece, it was all slipping away. Sarah hadn't contacted me since she left the house, but I knew where she was staying, at her parents' home across town. I hadn't spoken to her parents directly since sending them the evidence, but I heard through mutual acquaintances that the conversation hadn't gone well. They were furious, not just at Sarah for her infidelity, but at the humiliation it brought to their family. She's been asking to come back home, One of her friends texted me. She said she wants to fix things. What are you going to do? Nothing, I replied. She made her bed. She can lie in it. I decided it was time to begin the formal divorce process. My lawyer, whom I had already been in contact with, filed the papers that week. Thanks to the evidence of infidelity, the terms were clear. No alimony for Sarah, no claim to the house, and a clean split of assets in my favor. When Sarah received the papers, she called me for the first time since she left. Please, let's talk, she begged. We can work through this. There's nothing to work through, I said flatly. You killed this marriage, Sarah. You don't get to rewrite the ending. The news spread quickly through our quiet neighborhood. The once polite smiles that Sarah and Jason used to receive turned into cold stares and whispered conversations. Jason's pristine lawn went untended, his mailbox stuffed with unopened letters. Sarah, meanwhile, was a ghost, rarely seen, never heard. At the next neighborhood association meeting, I attended alone, sitting in the seat where Sarah and I used to sit together. People offered me condolences, whispered their outrage at what had happened. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of support, of community. Jason, of course, was absent. His name was removed from the association's leadership roster, and his reputation as a friendly, trustworthy neighbor was irreparably destroyed. Rachel, Jason's soon-to-be ex-wife, proved to be a force of her own. She took the evidence I had given her and used it to secure custody of their 2 children, as well as the majority of their marital assets. She reached out to me one evening, her voice a mix of gratitude and exhaustion. I don't know what I would have done without your help, she said. You gave me the leverage I needed to protect my kids. You didn't deserve what he did, I replied. None of us did. She hesitated. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here. I thanked her, but I wasn't ready for that yet. The wounds were still too fresh. A few weeks later, Sarah showed up at the house unannounced. She looked thinner, more tired, her usual confidence replaced by desperation. Please, she said, standing on the porch. I have nowhere else to go. That's not my problem, I replied, keeping my voice firm. You made your choice. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't waver. You didn't just betray me, I continued. You betrayed everything we built, every promise we made to each other. I can't forgive that. She left without another word, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of closure. Jason's life continued to spiral. With his marriage over and his career in ruins, he sold his house and moved out of the neighborhood. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was living in a small apartment downtown, drowning in debt and regret. I didn't feel sorry for him. He had gambled everything and lost. Months passed, and slowly, I began to rebuild. The house, once filled with painful memories, became a place of solace. I repainted the walls, rearranged the furniture, and made it my own again. Rachel and I crossed paths occasionally, our conversations growing warmer with each meeting. She was rebuilding too, focusing on her children and her career. In her, I saw a strength that mirrored my own, a quiet determination to move forward. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I realized that I no longer felt the weight of betrayal. It was still there, a scar that would never fully fade, but it no longer defined me. Sarah and Jason had tried to break me, but I had come out stronger, and as I looked toward the horizon, I knew this was only the beginning of a new chapter, one where I was finally free.